first, I think I want to thank everyone who contributed during Giving Tuesday, because we were able to surpass our matching mark of $10,000. So big
Yes.
ups to all of you for that. And even those people who thought about giving but like didn't have it, because these are like some really challenging times, right? And so like for those of you who are unable to give, like we appreciate the thought and the the intentions about giving, because I also know that I've been in that situation, and I still can find myself in that situation where I want to support, I want to give and like donate to an organization, and it's in my heart and it's in my spirit. But like we work in a profession that's not like we're not millionaires. We're
Nope.
just common people. And we do this work from the kindness of our heart. We do this because this is something deep in our spirit and our guts that motivates us and move us to try to like support the healing of other people, because many of us have shared their types of trauma, their types of harm, and their experiences, and we reach a certain level of recognition of our power, and we want other people to feel and recognize their power as well. So those rewards are even greater than the financial and monetary rewards there.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better, man. I think,
Mm.
if folks, even if just sharing this video, encouraging people to tune in live or sharing the recording later and encouraging folks to give if they can, I
Yeah.
think that makes a real difference. And folks actually that are following me who are here can actually donate straight from my Instagram. I'm trying to raise at least $100 before the end of the 90 days. So there's still plenty of time to give. And like you said, man, we really appreciate people's support and, for tuning in tonight. So thank you so much for everybody who's watching live and watching the recording later on.
Yeah, and just an update too. We've surpassed the halfway mark for our 90 days, 90,000. And we still have like another month to go. So
Yeah.
there's still other opportunities for you to give. There's still other opportunities for you to hear from people who are affiliated and working with MenHealing. But tonight we're gonna hear from Emiliano, and he's gonna like share like, I mean, I remember the first time you and I connected in preparation for this IG, which was like 3 months ago,
Yeah, it
right?
was well.
And you were like, and I remember we ended the conversation was like, oh man, we got plenty of time, and look how quick, right?
Yeah.
Like it's here.
And these have
Um,
been amazing. I mean, you have done such a phenomenal job. If I could speak on behalf of the board of directors,
mm,
like everyone has just been really impressed with the series, and you've done a phenomenal job of facilitating these conversations. So,
mm.
much love to you, man.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that, and I received that. So let's get into it, brother. Since you just led with that, like, tell people like what's your role, like, let people know like what's your connection to Men Healing. And, for me, like I really want people to emphasize the work that you're doing and like what
Thank
drove you
you.
to be connected to Men Healing. So share a little bit about yourself and like your connection to Men Healing.
I appreciate that. So, I work as a men's engagement specialist at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, or TAASA.
Mm-hmm.
I've been with TASA for 13 years, and before that, I was a victim advocate. So, um, worked with victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence, and ultimately that led me to this Sexual Assault Coalition here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I work primarily, with victim advocates, um, rape crisis centers, other institutions that are actually providing services to victims and survivors, which include boys and men who have experienced some form of sexual victimization. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I do a lot of training and technical assistance with those folks, right, to really
Mm-hmm.
enhance those services here in Texas and around the country. And so I've been very fortunate in my role to help people think about what those services can look like, how to make them more accessible to the boys and men in their communities. And so that's ultimately what brought me to MenHealing. I've always been, I've been following their work and have been forging relationships with folks at MenHealing, and was, really honored when they extended the invitation to join the board. And so I've been on the board now for 6 months. So I'm one of the newest board members.
Mm.
And like I said, man, it's just been a real pleasure to work with such an amazing group of folks, a really diverse group of folks who are so committed to the organization and to our mission at MenHealing. And so, I'm able to share my expertise and bring in a really unique perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just really honored. Like I said, if it wasn't for this opportunity, I probably, I wouldn't be with you tonight. So all of these things sort of have led me to to this moment with you. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really honored to be able to support folks who work with victims and survivors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that and like talking about that piece because like I don't know when I realized that like it's us tonight, I was like I want to go deep, right? Like I want us to
Let's do
talk
it.
about us, because that conversation that we had initially, there was like it was something that just like fed my spirit, you know what I mean? And like so, someone said like Ben Healing helped me in
Yeah.
2016 Weekend of Recovery. Like that's love.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
and that's a testimony. So like, yeah, man. So like, what is it like? What is it about your personal journey that led you, right? Because people probably like, he seems like a really smart guy, handsome guy. Like, come on, this guy could be doing anything. He could be working for a corporation. He could be doing a lot of different things. Like, what is it that like personally like moved you to want to
Yeah.
do this type of work, working with advocates, working with people who've experienced harm and trauma, and then more specifically like working with, being a part of like the Men Healing board.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think for like a lot of folks who are watching right now, either know someone who is a victim or survivor, or they themselves, are a victim or survivor.
Mm,
And that's ultimately how I came to this work as a survivor,
mm,
both of, family violence and sexual abuse. I think the, you know, that's ultimately how so many people have come to MenHealing or come to this work, right?
mm,
Is from their own experiences of violence and abuse or other forms of trauma. So it grew up here in Austin, Texas, and experienced all types of violence, both at home, at school, and on the street. It was just like um, it had just a profound impact on me. And I think ultimately that's what led me into this work is I began to be, for folks that are that know my story, I ended up being abusive in my own relationships as a teenager, and was very fortunate that there was early intervention from the local rape crisis center here in Austin,
mhm,
Safe Alliance. And so they did a program with young men and young women who were both experiencing domestic violence at home and sexual abuse, and doing an intervention program called Expect Respect. They actually continue to do that work with young people here in Central Texas. And so I was very fortunate when I was a sophomore to get into this program, and it ultimately transformed my life. It really, I think, like for a lot of folks, MenHealing was the place where they begin to sort of heal from their trauma or begin that process of healing. And for me, Expect Respect was very similar. It was 3 years of really intensive support groups with other young men who had similar experiences as me. And that's what ultimately led me to, after I graduated from high school, to volunteer with Safe Alliance, and then, eventually work as a children's advocate in the battered women's shelter. And the rest is history. It's those experiences that really led me to do this work as a young man, and then ultimately to be able to work with other men like myself that are coming into the work, or that want to do this work, or that have a shared lived experience, and really helping to guide them, and to help them heal too. I think even regardless of wherever you're at sort of on your journey, at whatever your age is, right? that there, is opportunity to heal. When you're ready, MenHealing is here, right? As well as other folks in your community. And so I was very fortunate to come to the work in that way. So that's ultimately what brought me here tonight. So I'm eternally grateful for the folks who helped, sort of guided me, who mentored me, and ultimately helped me, to begin that healing journey, which I'm still on, like you. I think, and all the men who come to MenHealing, are on that journey. And so, folks who are watching might be on that journey as well. So it's important to know that you're not alone. And I think that those experiences were really transformative and ultimately, led me to the work that I do today with folks who provide, who do that work, right? Who do the education, who do the outreach, who provide services to victims and survivors. So it's sort of, I'm able to give back in that way, and I think that's been really important. It's not just a job; it really is. It's my life's work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, brother. Like I don't know, like it's interesting because the spirit was moving me tonight about this conversation, bro. Because one of the things that I always want people to understand is like one, right? Like we're more than like the worst thing that we've ever done, right? And like unfortunately, we are functioning in a system in a society that's rooted in this like punishment paradigm that just says like, you do something wrong, you hurt someone, right? Like you deserve to be punished. And that is so like counterintuitive and like ineffective in addressing the harm that those who cause harm have experienced, because no one who has caused harm hasn't experienced harm. I will say
Yeah,
that, and I stand
yeah,
by that. And it's the harm that we experience, that other folks experience, that like puts them on this path that makes them like likely to hurt and harm someone else. And so that's why we know like the answer isn't like punishing behaviors. Yes, we might find ourselves in a situation where you have to remove certain people and separate depending on how much harm they've experienced. But like ultimately the goal is like to work towards helping people heal from the harm
yes,
that they've experienced, right? That oftentimes makes us desensitized, that makes us like act out in ways that are like inconsistent with who we truly are, but just responsive to our unaddressed trauma, right? And then we get all of these messages that are rooted in patriarchy and like toxic masculinity that tells us that like the way that you survive, the way that you thrive, the way that you affirm your masculinity, your identity as a man is through harm, right?
yep,
And so that's why like, similar to you, like I'm so committed to this healing work because like we don't think about the ways that men have been harmed that
yep,
has influenced their decisions, their behaviors, sometimes not like conscious of them in a way that causes harm to other people. You know what I mean? And so like you touched on that. And I think
yeah,
that's like so critical for people to understand. I was watching uh Oprah have a conversation with Dr. Bruce Perry and then talking about their new book, What Happened to You. And it's like those of us who've been in this work for years are like what happened to us, that's something that's one of the most like to me like critical shifts that the trauma work has offered to the field of like victim services, like, you know, that we shift from saying like, what's wrong with you? Because what's wrong with you leaves a person susceptible to the labeling, right? And then if you factor in all of these other things, because we are two men of color, black
yeah,
and brown men coming here.
yep,
So like there's all of these other like messages and information that are telling us that as black and brown men, there is something inherently wrong with us. There is something inherently criminal with us. There is something that is like, and that's rooted in white supremacy, right? So you couple
yeah,
that You couple that with the messaging that some of our family members have internalized, right? We've internalized as a people. So now, like, whenever a person does something wrong, it's not like, what happened to you? What are you trying to process? What are
Yeah.
you trying to work through? It's like, what's wrong with you?
Yep.
What's wrong with you?
Yep. And you know, the folks at Safe Alliance, you know, shout out to them. They're still doing that work. You know, I think if it was not for that early intervention, for men and women who really believed in our capacity to heal, to change, you know, it was intensive, you know, and it was something that I voluntarily did. A lot of the men in the group were had to be there, right? Because we had all committed acts of teen dating violence,
Mm-hmm.
and other, you know, other forms of abuse, right? And our partners were in a similar group that met separately, simultaneously. And so, you know, these young women were also doing their own work. And that, I think that was critically important. You know, one of the unique aspects of this project is that the young men go to get an opportunity to hear and to talk to these young women who were experiencing abuse from brothers like us. You know what I mean? And we're talking about a really diverse. So it wasn't just Black and brown young men. It was, you know, it was a really diverse group of guys, you know, with a different, you know, diverse experiences, lived experiences, etc. But I think ultimately we had all committed some act of violence or abuse, right? And I think, you know, I'm not ashamed of acknowledging that, right? It's not, you know, people know that. So folks who are watching that know me know that my story. You know, I've been telling my story from the very beginning, and I think ultimately that sharing of my story, just like for a lot of male survivors who come to MenHealing, the act of sharing your story is you know is a huge step in terms of beginning that healing journey. Again, wherever you are on that journey, just, you know, even if you're just getting started, you know, your ability to say that story out loud and to be believed, right, to be acknowledged, to be understood, you know, I think is really important. So I think for folks who are watching who may know, right, who may know a male survivor in their life, the ability just to listen and to believe and to allow that person to come to you and to share their story with you, or to the you know, the power of sharing the stories of male survivors, especially on social media, I think it really, again, gives what you were saying earlier in terms of patriarchy, right, and our ideas around masculinity, made it so difficult for me to just begin to share my story, right? But also to acknowledge the fact that there were inherently systematic forms of things that were happening in my home and in my community, that made violence possible, right? And I think ultimately that's the kind of change that we are trying to create here at TAASA in Texas, is we're trying to change, you know, the environment that people live, that they work in, that they go to school in, that they worship in, et cetera, right? We're trying to change in that you know, society, so that these forms of violence and abuse are just, they're not acceptable, but that there are places of holding, you know, where folks can get the support that they need, and there are systems in place where we can hold people accountable, without, you know, the criminal system, right? So I think, you know, so we are, you know, in a lot of ways beginning to look at the way that we provide services, ensuring that services are accessible, especially to boys and men of color, I think, and other marginalized groups of men, right? Like all the conversations that you've had, like we want to think critically, you know, like, are we being intentional? Are we being thoughtful about how we provide those services and ensuring that those services are available and accessible to male survivors, from all different types of, you know, from all different walks of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the piece that you just said that like really hit me is like, accountability without punishment, right? And I think that's the piece that we typically conflate the two and say like accountability is the way, punishment is the way that you hold people accountable. But we know that that's proven to not be an effective approach to support people's healing journey, right? What it does is just it further like perpetuates the isolating shame that leaves people hiding in the dark, right? Who've been hurt and who hurt other people. And so like that's what we're striving to do. That's what MenHealing is striving to do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking, right? And I'm just thinking about families. I'm thinking about people who've been hurt. Um, and it's hard, right? It's hard for us to see beyond our personal experiences with a situation with a person, right? To think about all these other factors that contribute to the person's behaviors and like put them in that state where they would hurt us. And so, that's one of the things that's so important about, organizations and work like MenHealing is doing, because we don't ask you, like as a partner, as a child, as a family member, as a loved one to like do that, right? The people at MenHealing come to this work because we share these experiences, we have the insight, the perspective, we've established ourselves credentially in ways that allows us to do this work, specifically with other men who are going through these situations. And so we don't want to put the onus on the family, but we want
Yeah.
to say that, like, when you support the healing of men, when you support the healing of someone who survived sexual violence and sexual harm, right? It's not only just impacting his life, it's also impacting the lives of those people who love him, the people who are in his family, in his household, who care about him, right? And not to
Yep.
say that you're doing that for the purpose of, avoiding harm, but it's also a way to get him to a space to where like people like Emiliano and me can be able to help other people heal, because we are two people who have been harmed and experienced sexual violence and sexual harm and other forms of harm. But now we're at a place where we're helping other people heal. And that's the
Yep.
reason why people should invest in MenHealing. That's why we're having these conversations, so people can understand that like there's a residual effect. There's like an exponential impact that this type of work can have, not only on individuals who've experienced the harm themselves, but all of those people who are around them in their ecosystem.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, man, because one of the things, for me, I'm a father. I have a 12-year-old son, and part of my work is about is commitment to him and to my partner Cynthia, to ensure that the experiences that I had, as a boy, that he never experiences those things, and that ultimately that we have a healthy relationship, and that he doesn't have to, he doesn't have those same lived experiences. And so it's a big part of my role, both as a partner and as a father, and as a co-parent with Cynthia. I think just ensuring that, like I said, he doesn't have those lived experiences. He never has to experience or witness violence or abuse, right? At the hands of his father, right? Which again is very much part of my lived experience, and I imagine for folks who might be watching, is part of theirs, right? Of being abused by the men in their life. And so, I that that cycle, right, of violence, this generational cycle that of violence that was happening in my family is over, right, with me, right? I think that was, I think that's the work, right? That's the ongoing healing work of both healing from that trauma and creating the kind of world that I wanted as a boy, just kind of reimagining what what these relationships would look like, what my family would look like, what my relationship with my partner would look like, what my relationship with my son would look like, right? And I get to create that. right? I think that's also a big part of my healing work is being able to have conversations with him from a very early age about, just consent and boundaries and what's appropriate. Why, what kind of touch is appropriate? Like, um, you know, beginning to have conversations with him as he's sort of entering puberty about sexual behavior and about consent and about engaging in healthy sexual behavior and having a healthy sexual relationship. So I think, that's a new level of the work because nobody had those conversations with me, right? Like I think it's
Yeah.
ultimately, you know what I mean? Like that to me is just really been very profound. Um, like, and it's probably been the most rewarding experience that I've had up to this point. And I imagine that a lot of folks who are parents or co-parents or guardians probably would say the same thing, right? Is like their ability to create the kind of this lived experiences where they're not they're not hurting, like, there's no violence or abuse in their home, so I think that's, to me, that's just been an amazing experience, that I've had. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can identify like, and it's also the hardest and the scariest, right? Um, because like the last thing that we ever want to do, right? And I know when I'm as a father of two sons, like the last thing I ever wanted to do was pass on anything, right? And it's like
Yeah.
this like constant fear, right? Because it is cyclical, but because it's like been generational, right? And the way that it's been passed down from one father to the next father, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we're working against a lot. And so
Yeah.
that in itself, to me, if you really want to say, like, that is like the real work, right? and
Mm.
and when people talk about healing work, the real healing work starts at home. The real
Yeah.
healing work starts with self. Those of us who are providers, who are advocates, who are victim service advocates, who do this work professionally, the real work is internally. The real
Mm.
work is making sure that we kind of like, cut that cycle so we don't pass on. And the fact is, we're gonna pass on some of that shit. Let's just keep it
Yep.
real. We're gonna
Yeah,
pass
that's
on some of
true.
that shit, right? And so it's
Guilty.
important for
Yep.
us to be compassionate, to practice self-compassion, right? And show ourselves some grace so we don't get to a point where we get so overwhelmed that we just give up, right? Because
Yep.
it's a daily job. And that's the piece where,
Yes.
you know what I mean? It's a daily
It
job. And
is,
that's on
man.
top of
It's
like helping with homework, helping you figure out how to comb your hair, do all of like the basic stuff. But like then on this, we got this whole internal world that's taking place inside of us, and so, that's why I think it's so amazing that people are able to support us and love us and be there. You talk about your partner,
yeah.
and big ups to your partner for holding you
Yes.
in that space. And like, you know what I mean? Because I'm sure they
Yeah.
know what's going on inside of you after all of this
Yeah,
time,
for
and are
sure.
able to hold
For
you.
sure. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that it's been, again, I've been recently reflecting on we're going to be celebrating 20 years of marriage in February of next year, and like I tell a lot of people as part of this story, like this is the first relationship, like the first healthy relationship, the first healthy nonviolent relationship that I've ever been in, right? I think when you think about how, like for me, right, like just from my lived experiences to be able to be in that kind of relationship and to have that kind of partner who really loves and support me, and really understands, like she knows about all this shit, right? Like she knows my story better than anybody. She was there. She witnessed the impacts on the violence that was happening even when I was working at the domestic violence shelter, right? So even when I started as a children's advocate, my mother was still experiencing, violence and abuse, right? So, here I was an adult doing this work, and my mom was still experiencing violence and abuse at home, right? but I was still witnessing, and there wasn't anything I could do. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for a lot of us, we carry that trauma. We live with it for the rest of our lives. And so, um, while, carrying that has been difficult, you know what I mean? Because I can't just, you're right. I would love to just like forget it, but it's always with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately, that's what drives me. I think to do the things that we've been talking about, just to commit, to recommit myself to living a life of nonviolence, and to do the healing work, right? Which, like you said, is not easy, right? Because I've made plenty of mistakes. I make mistakes every day, but I think ultimately it's my my willingness to learn, and to model, not just
Mm-hmm.
from like, I think a big part of my work is about modeling, not just for my son, but also for other boys and men of color in my life that hear my story, that know about my work, and that hopefully will continue, will join me in doing the work, right? Because that's a
Yeah.
big part of what I'm trying to do here in Texas, is to invite men, especially men of color and male survivors, into this space to do this work, right? Because I think, um, you know, I was the first man and the first man of color to work in that battered women's shelter. But when I left that organization, there have been countless men and countless men of color who have followed in my footsteps, right? So I think ultimately there's an important it's important to encourage, to invite people to support not just MenHealing, but to support their local rape crisis center, to volunteer, to donate, to serve in some capacity, to support other survivors in their community. I can't tell you how important it is uh, for folks to not just see male survivors coming forward and sharing their story, but to see men coming forward and supporting survivors, right?
Yeah.
Standing with them, and again, um, you know, that's an important, at least for me, that's been an important part of my healing work, right? It's my ability to give what I've received, right? And I think that, um, there's space, there's room for everyone, just regardless of their experience, um, there's a seat at the table for them, and their contribution, like you said earlier, regardless of how big or small, can really make a difference, right? Especially with the boys and men in your life. I think it makes it possible for them to continue to come forward and to share their story and to get the support and the help that they need, and to begin, their own journey of recovery. If that's just like I said, just sharing this video with the boys and men in your life. I think it ultimately might give one of those men permission to begin to share their story, and to go to a weekend of recovery. And that's why people support is so critical right now with the 90 days, the 90,000 in 90 days, because your support is going to make that possible, right? For men like me and you, right? Um, to be able to participate in weekends of recovery here at MenHealing. So, yeah, it has been quite the journey, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you, brother. One of the things I know for sure is that you have a tremendous amount of love to give in your heart.
Mm.
And I think that's something that comes from these hardships, these struggles, and a tremendous amount of empathy. And I believe that that's possible for every man, every survivor. Thank you all for joining. This recording is also going to be saved on the MenHealing's YouTube page. So if you don't have IG, if you want to take a look at it later, make sure to check it out there. Emiliano, have a blessed night. Bless you, bless
Same to
your
you, brother.
family. Take
Yeah,
care.
happy holidays, and thank you so much, Richard, for all that you do, man.
All right. Take care, bro. Peace.
Have a good night. Bye.